Welcome to all my cats out there. In this screencast, what I'd like to do is build an awk function that would essentially go through a whole bunch of markdown files and edit a certain portion of the text in that file. Now, I could go ahead and do that manually, but what I'd like to demonstrate is how awk can be super powerful in doing a whole bunch of these mass text editing capabilities. To demonstrate what I'm going to do in this screencast, let me just quickly tell you the objective. So I host my blog here in this website. And if you notice in every single blog post, I have the date component in the title, in the URL. So I have a year, month, and day in the URL. And I want to change my blog so that the date component is removed from the URL of each and every single title. I can go ahead and do that pretty easily in Jekyll by changing the permalink out here. So I can go ahead and do this and I should be off to the races. If I redeploy Jekyll, it would work. The only problem is if I have a whole bunch of other places on the internet that link to my blog and they refer to the previous URL, then all those places will start breaking. So I want to be a little better at that and actually make sure that it doesn't break so that both places would go back and link to the same place. In order to do this, what I would have to do is open up every single blog post, identify the YAML front matter, which is this portion that's in between those three dashes or hyphens. Go to the end of that YAML front matter, add this directive called redirect from, then enter the file name, and I can do that pretty easily with Vim like this. I would need to remove the suffix and add a trailing slash there. I would need a slash here, and then replace the dashes between the year component to forward slashes. Essentially what I'm trying to do is make it resemble the previous URL. So if I look at the previous URL, this portion, what Jekyll now will do is anyone attempting to access my blog with this link would be redirected to the new link, and that would be the one without the title once I make the config change. So this is basically what I want to do. The trouble though is if I actually look at my posts directory, there's about 86 of these files. So I'm not going to go through each and every single markdown file and actually add and edit that content. That would take quite some time. This is far more easily achieved through awk. What I'm going to do now is build this awk function with you and show you how I wrote it. But if you've never used awk before, one thing you should notice is that the syntax for any awk function is essentially this. You have a begin function, and in this begin function, you basically say, hey, execute actions 1, 2, 3, etc. Then I have a portion that takes in a pattern, and I'll explain this in a second. You then have similar actions. These aren't obviously the same actions as before, but you could just add more actions as your heart pleases. And then you have an end block in here with more actions that you can add in here. And out here, I would actually provide the file name. Awk essentially reads every single file, every single line in this file, and it performs if that file, if the line matches this pattern, then it executes these actions. But before it starts doing any of that, you can say, hey, in this begin block, I have these actions that I want you to execute once before you start reading every single file that matches this pattern and then execute these actions. And as a complementary function, you also have an end block there, which you can say, okay, at the end of this, do just also like execute these actions. Every single awk program that you see on the internet follows this syntax. It might tend to look a little different because sometimes people post examples and they look super terse and complicated. It's not. You can actually build these things, and hopefully at the end of this screencast, you should have a better sense of that. But also the begin block is optional. So I don't even have to like enter this portion. The pattern is optional. And if I don't provide a pattern in awk, what it does is it basically assumes that these actions have to be applied on the entire line. And then you also have an end block, which is optional. So to begin, let's start with a very simple awk program. But before that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my syntax to be fish. This basically is just Vim making the output here look a little more pretty. And I'm going to write my first awk program. It's going to be very straightforward. I'm going to basically say, hey, actually, let me execute this in Vim so I can build this along the way. I'm going to say, hey, just print anything you see along the way. So every single line that you read, I'm going to actually pick up a real file name so it actually does run in the end of this. And let's execute this and see what happens. So if you notice what awk is doing is it's reading every single line here, and it's basically just printing the line, and that's about what happens here. This also follows the same syntax that I mentioned before. The begin is optional, the end is optional, the pattern is optional, and all I'm providing it is just a sequence of actions. And in this, my action is just print. So this is your very first awk program. It's super straightforward. Now what I'm going to do is, if you remember my objective, it was to identify this part of the file, the ending part of the YAML front matter, and I wanted to add the redirect from portion at the end of that. So what I'm going to do here is, at least to start, try to identify these two portions. Like this looks very different in the file. So I want to be able to at least get to this. And the way I'm going to do that is just do a basic file comparison. The beauty with awk is it's a programming language. Unlike sed, which is another similar program, I like awk because even if I don't care necessarily about efficiency, I can just write programs that look more intuitive to me. And with these, I can basically build and really harness the power of awk. So out here, what I'm doing is I'm saying $0. Another thing you should realize with awk is when it reads every single line, by default, it assumes a file separator. And the file separator by default is space. So awk will read this line and it'll assign tokens to each of those numerals. So $1 would refer to the first word separated by the first space, which is a space. $2 would refer to the second word, $3 would refer to the third word, etc. $0, which is the only one I'm going to actually use in this screencast, refers to the entire line, which is why what I'm doing now is I'm telling awk, if the entire line is equal to just 3 dashes, then do something. For now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to print 3 XXXs instead of that, and I can add an else line where I say, hey, if not, just go ahead and print the line. So what this does now is it tries to identify just the portion of the front matter separators. So if I paste this and check it out, there we go. Awk replaces the 3 hyphens just with 3 XXXs. And as you can see, this makes it easier for me to start to identify just this portion. Now what I'm going to do is actually use the begin block. Because what I want to do is I want to be able to identify the second occurrence of the 3 hyphens and then do something. I don't really care about the first occurrence of the 3 hyphens. So I need some kind of count in order to do this. This is where we use the begin block. I'm going to initialize n as just a counter to be 0. And I'm going to say increment the counter by 1. And just to see what the value we observe, I'm going to print the line number with every single line that awk prints out. Again, I just wanted to remind you, it's a variable, so you refer to it as n. You don't write, you don't add a $sign, which is very typical for most variables in programming languages, the dollars only refer to these file token things that I mentioned previously. Let's quickly run this program and see what happens. If you notice, awk now prints the line number with every single line. This is great because now I can start to do things like identify just the second occurrence of something. Instead of incrementing the line everywhere, I'm now going to increment the line only if I observe the 3 hyphens. Let's remove the n from there. And if I do this, let's print that function again. Now I've essentially printed the line number only when I observe hyphen, hyphen, hyphens. And I can actually separate this very easily out. I can say, in addition to checking if the line is equal to 3 dashes, if n is equal to 1, then in that case, print xxx. I'm getting my Vim a little messed up here. If not, then I just want to go ahead and print the line as usual. I don't honestly care about what happens to the first set of hyphen, hyphen, hyphens. So let's see if, in fact, I can even remove the n now. What I'm going to do is, I would expect awk now to only print xxx for the second occurrence. And that's exactly what happens. So you can see I'm really close to my original objective that I mentioned before. This is 0 indexed, which is why it's 1. If I started with 1, then I would say 2, and that would refer to the second occurrence of the hyphen, hyphen, hyphens, the 3 dashes. But now that I've gotten a hold of this portion of the file, I'm going to actually replace this with more realistic stuff. So I'm going to say redirect from, which is, if you remember the objective, move to the next line in awk, add 4 spaces, add a hyphen, / prefix for the URL. Now I'm just going to insert like a file name separator here because eventually this is what I want printed, right? I'm going to add that and run this program. Actually, I'm forgetting some things. When you go ahead, you're going to print redirect from the file name. I would have to move to the new line again and print the YAML front matter because I don't want to forget that. So what I'm going to do here is move to the next line and then print those 3 hyphens that closes the YAML front matter. And now I think I should be very close. So there you go. You see, I've pretty much gotten what I want. Now, instead of supplying a dummy file name, I'm actually going to send in the real file name. In order to do this in awk, what you have to do is use this argument called -v. So I can say -v file name, and for now I'm just going to pass a dummy file name like something.md. I think I spelled that incorrectly. I'm going to go to this file name, and instead of hard coding the file name, I'm going to close the first string, add file name. Again, file name now refers to the variable, so I actually don't need to add a dollar or anything. And that should pretty much do it. Let me try to see if that gets me almost all the way there. So you see, I've provided the file name, which is the variable in here. It adds that to this portion. Let me actually use the real file name because I think that might make this a little more realistic. So I have the file name here, but I don't exactly want the exact file name. I want to strip off the markdown suffix, and the way I'm going to do that is I'm not worrying too much here about writing a super elegant sort of awk script because I'm only going to run this once. And so instead, I'm going to say, whenever you encounter the suffix .md, replace it with a / and do that for the variable file name. So what it's going to do now is it's going to take the file name, replace this portion with a forward slash. Let's see if I got that portion right. Whoops, I have a mistake in here. Let me go back to yeah, so you see the problem here is I got a little excited, and when I passed the file name, I actually forgot the single quote that you need. If you notice here, I forgot the single quote. Let me add that, and I think that should take care of it. Yeah, there we go. All right, we are back into the races, and if you notice, the .md suffix is removed from here. Awesome. I also want to remove the first, second, and third hyphen occurrences. So let me also just quickly use the same approach that I did. Anytime you encounter a hyphen, actually replace that with the forward slash, and do that for the same variable file name. I need to do this a grand total of 3 times. Execute the function, and I am there. So there you go. Now if I provide the file name as I notice in my directory, then everything is taken care of. But I need to pass, I have a mechanism of passing that in to awk, but awk can't read the directory. For that, I'm going to resort to a very basic for loop function. And this is one of the reasons I like fish as the shell. You can write really simple and intuitive programs like this. I can basically say just echo $f, which would basically get me there. So this says for this variable f, iterate through the list, iterate through this directory, and every file that has the suffix .md, associate that to f, which is the file name. And this should function pretty much like an ls or a listing function. So let me add that in here. I'm going to say for f in $md. I'm going to go all the way and actually align this so I have it nice and neatly formatted. And I did echo. You can see here I can basically use anything here. I can say echo do something, and it'll run whatever I've used in that echo statement onto the file name. So I'm gonna apply a similar thing. I'm gonna say, hey fish, anytime you run across $f, instead pass that to awk. Take the file name, pass that file name to awk, and I'm also going to replace it here. And if I got this right, this should pretty much go through every single file and just do what I want. So if you notice, let's pick this file. It runs through this blog post and it inserts this exactly like how I want it. There's one problem, and this is because there are certain blog posts where I've already added a redirect for different purposes, and so those clash. I don't think there are that many, and towards the end I'll also write a quick function to show me the different places, but there aren't too many of these, so I'm not even going to bother writing a more complicated awk script at this point. Let's look at this. I just want to make sure that it's correct. So if you see, each of these look perfectly as I had imagined. There's one small problem though. This is all fine and great. This is printing out the contents. I really don't want to just leave it at printing out the contents. I want to actually replace the file. And in order to do this in awk, you use another parameter called -i, and you pass in place as an argument to awk. And what awk will do now is, instead of simply reading and printing out the lines, it'll actually replace your file in place with the content that awk reads out through this program. Now, there's different arguments you can pass. You can say, hey, replace it instead with a backup file, so you can create a backup file and keep the original as usual. I honestly don't care. I'm just going to do this, and I can be confident because this directly directory is version controlled with Git. So if I do something catastrophically wrong, I can basically just uh, replace the. I can just like reset my directory, and I'll be off to the races. So right now, if you notice, there are only 2 changed files. After I run this, I anticipate a whole bunch of files to have been changed, and you can see it did it in place. And there are about 72 files that have changed. Let me quickly just pick one of these to see if those changes look good. Yep, the changes look good. It basically took the file name. This is what the file name is. This one looks confusing because the blog post actually has the date in it for different reasons. Let me pick one that doesn't have that. If you see, it takes the file name and formats it in a way that I want, and this resembles pretty much the existing URL of my blog. And so now that I've changed the config and I've added this redirect from, I'm off to the races. This pretty much almost concludes my screencast, but in the screencast, I also mentioned that I would show you how I would identify quickly how many of these blog posts have the redirect from tag twice. I use this search utility called ripgrep. You can like Google it. It's one of the most amazing tools for like quickly searching through the contents of various files. So I'm going to say, hey, ripgrep, search for all occurrences. This minus hidden and minus s is the default, so I just basically default. You can again look those up. I don't want to get into that for now. If you're curious, let me know in the comments, and I can do another screencast on how I use ripgrep. So this will search through every single file here. I'm going to say I only want to list the file names. Don't show me the actual content because that isn't useful here. So it lists all the file names. But I also want to say, hey, display the count in ripgrep. So how many times does redirect from occur in every single file? And so if you can observe here, there are some that have it twice, and these are exactly the kind of ones I want to filter out. And I love using ripgrep like this. If I only learn how to use ripgrep, that basically just, does most of this stuff for me. I can say, hey, on top of that, run ripgrep on these results and filter out the ones that have :2, which is basically saying the ones that occur twice. And if you notice, there aren't too many of these. There's basically just 9 files that I need to go in and actually edit manually. So this pretty much sums up how I use awk, and I hope you found this screencast useful. I can show you some as and when I run through some of these use cases. I can also show you other ways of building awk, but awk is a really powerful utility that you should add. And again, want to come to all my cats out there, and I'll catch you in the next screencast.